Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on building your impact engine. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to give everybody a few minutes just to join the Zoom room before we get into today's content. We've got a very exciting panel joining us today, and I'm really excited for the next hour of content. We're going to be hearing a lot about building your impact engine within the higher education space and understanding what that means in our different panelists' organisations and what it means to them individually as well. So great to have you all joining us. Yeah, as I said, we're going to get underway in just a few minutes' time. My name is Taylor, and I'm joining you from Overton today. It would be great to know who we've got joining us today. So if you feel free to do so. Please pop open the chat and let us know where in the world you're joining us from and what organisation you're joining us from as well. As I mentioned, my name's Taylor. I am your host for today. I'm joining from Overton. I'm also joining you from very windy, rainy, horrible London today. It's not very nice for me. But if you would like to, then please do let us know in the chat where you're joining us from. It would be great to know. We've got a fantastic panel that's going to share some really great insights with us. So I'm very excited to hear from them. As I mentioned, if you feel comfortable doing so, please do put that in the chat. We are recording today's session and we'll be sharing the insights from our discussion via email afterwards. So if you want to revisit any parts of the conversation or share the learnings from today's session with anyone who's unable to attend today's session, you can do so afterwards. We'll be emailing you with all of the links that you will need after the session. Please note that others will be able to see any comments that you make in the chat or in the Q&A, so just keep that in mind throughout today's session. As I mentioned, we'll be sending through the recording afterwards, and we'll be including Overton's new impact reporting guide alongside that. This guide offers practical tools and techniques showing how to build data-driven stories that resonate with funders, donors, and policymakers, and how transparent impact reporting can become a genuine competitive advantage in today's higher education sphere. The starting point for today's discussion is growing importance of impact in higher education and finding ways to translate research and connect it to real-world outcomes. We'll be looking at how to understand, track, and measure that influence, plus how this can be wielded to support strategic institutional goals. We've brought together 4 research leaders who will share a common mission. Each of them is deeply invested in evaluating, creating, and communicating societal impact from research and in raising the profile of this work within the higher education community. Firstly, we have Susan Renoe, who's the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research, Development and Strategic Partnerships at the University of Missouri. She's also the Executive Director for the Center of Advancing Research Impact in Society, or ARIS. Working with Susan at ARIS as co-PI is Laurie van Egeren, who is also the Vice Provost of Public Engagement at the University of Minnesota and the President of the Engagement Scholarship Consortium. And ARIS's work is supported by the National Science Foundation, and they use the framework of broader impacts, which focuses on how research connects to society through education, inclusion, and community benefit. And then bringing in the clinical and translational science lens, we have Elizabeth Fortune, and she's the Administrative Director of Virginia Commonwealth University's Wright Center for Clinical and Translational Research. The NIH-supported STSA programs are focused on moving research from bench to bedside, ensuring healthcare discoveries improve patient outcomes. And finally, we have Max Crowley, who is the Director of Penn State Evidence to Impact Collaborative, and the collaborative uses technology and deep analysis to examine how impact is defined, measured, and communicated across different systems. And crucially, it does so from an independent perspective and not tied to federal mandates. Finally, it's worth noting that 3 of our panelists are working at land-grant universities, and these institutions were built with a specific mandate to serve local communities through research, education, and engagement. And these universities form structural bridges between science and society, ensuring that knowledge flows both ways between researchers and the community they serve. So that is our panel for the next hour. It's great to see so many of you. Apologies that the chat wasn't live before, but it looks like it is now. So it's great to see a load of you introducing yourselves in the chat. Please do continue to do so. It would be great to know who we've got in the room, and I can see that we've got a load of different geographies joining us as well. So that would be fantastic to see. As always, this session will be recorded. We'll be sharing everything afterwards. So if there are any resources that we talk about during the session, don't worry, we will be sending links through afterwards, so you will get all of those. That is going to be enough from me for the time being. So I'm going to start handing over to our panelists so that we can start hearing from them on today's session, which I'm very excited to get into. As I mentioned before, please do feel free to put your questions in the chat. We're going to start off with a load of questions that we already had pre-prepared, but we'll be getting to the audience Q&A. So feel free to submit them as they come to you. Don't worry, don't need to wait until the Q&A section later on today. So Susan, I'm going to come to you first with our first question. Our first question is kind of what motivates you personally to focus on research impact and broader engagement, and how does that connect to your institute's and your team's strategic priorities?
Thanks. I love this question. I have always been interested in bringing research and communities together for positive societal good. Since I was a graduate student, I was doing this for a long time, so I love that. I get great personal fulfillment from it when talking about my research with people and listening to their needs. I think that's really important. I love listening to what people's needs are and the opportunities and challenges and thinking about how research can address those needs. When we think about ERIS, our whole goal is to provide best practices for connecting research and communities and opportunities for individuals, so researchers and practitioners, as well as institutions to do that. I also think about that in my role as Associate Vice Chancellor. I work to bring researchers and communities together. And you talked about being a land grant. So I'm very fortunate to have a joint appointment between our research office and our Office of Extension and Engagement. And as a land grant, all of this is baked right into the heart of our mission and our strategic plan. So that's something that I think is really important.
Fantastic. Thank you. Laurie, can I come to you with the same question?
You bet. And thanks for inviting me to be here with these great colleagues. I'm very practical, and so I'm motivated by things that demonstrate real impact and demonstrate real meaning. And our institutions have not necessarily focused on that kind of direct impact. So we do incredible work. But we know that a lot of it never actually reaches a stage where it has some sort of impact in the real world. So all the things that go into publications and work often have to have a very long kind of timeline to get to where somebody is using the research that's taken in that paper. And it has to sort of be found. It's kind of a very kind of serendipitous, we're doing work in this area, we find your work, we're going to use it. And a lot of it never reaches that stage. And so I think that there are ways to make that more effective and so that our universities aren't as opaque. We are seeing this lack of public trust in universities, and we know that we're still, doing better than a lot of other kinds of institutional level organizations and systems. But we know that there's a lack of trust. We also know that people love their scientists and they love their students that they work with. And so there's a lack of translation from that individual level to the system level and the university level. So I'm really interested in trying to build both the capacity of our faculty and our staff and students to do work with communities or in ways that are meeting the needs and co-created in really effective ways, and having an institutional level perception of how do we reach out and make this work have more direct meaning.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Laurie. Elizabeth, same question for you as well.
So, at least in the US right now, we have a crisis in science. Laurie referred to it a moment ago as a lack of public trust in institutions. And, for the longest time, we've always thought the science speaks for itself. And we've not really done a great job with connecting it to policy, connecting it to impact. I want lawmakers, I want the public to care about what we're doing. And I think, and also my grant center funded center is accountable to not to the sponsors that invest funds in it, but also the communities that we serve. And so I want to show how our research, moves from guidance to actual policy. And how are the citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia helped by this? And I think by providing this sort of external evidence, it gives us the ability to do that with confidence.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Max, I'm going to come to you.
Now, definitely, I am in full agreement with what my colleagues have already shared in terms of the rationale here. I think that maybe the one thing that I would add in terms of how we approach things from here at Penn State University and from the Evidence to Impact Collaborative perspective is there's a science to how to do this. There is a science to scientific impact, and what scientific impact can be broadly defined. But this is about making meaningful change to systems and behavior to be able to enhance and improve that impact, whether it be with policymakers or with communities or with commercialization. And that we, as a scientific community, can't sort of, I think, as you said, Elizabeth, we can't just sort of let the science speak for itself. We know that doesn't happen, right? Our papers, our academic papers in particular, do not do that. And that we need to think about how we change systems, how we change behavior, both inside of our research institutions and outside of them in a strategic way, but do so also in a way that's replicable and scalable, right? And sustainable. And so that's, I think, a really key element of work in this area. And I think that where we've taken a big step forward as a field is that it's not only that we're starting to see a sea change, not only here in North America, but I think around the world, around a more thoughtful approach to, well, we need to be more impactful. We need to connect our science to impact, but also that we're having tools come online that are themselves evidence-based, that are themselves based on rigorous evaluation, rigorous scientific study of how we go about achieving more, better scientific impact to improve the lives of people every day.
Fantastic, thank you. Max, I'm actually going to put our next question to you, just to pull on something that you said at the end there. So there seems to be, or there has been previously at least, that kind of the tension between research excellence and real world impact. It's something that you just touched on then. What do you think about that relationship, and how do we kind of shift the mindset or the strategy to help bring the two closer together so they kind of aren't at odds with each other, but rather are a kind of symbiotic relationship?
Yeah, I think that there's always going to be a tension, right? I don't think we should pretend like there won't be. But I also think that we have to, from the scientific community standpoint, look ourselves in the mirror and say, well, who defines what impact is, and who gets to define that? And why did we get into science in the first place? And for many folks, right, you get into science because you see a problem in the world that you want to fix. But that problem isn't happening inside of a university or a research institution. It's happening out in the real world to real people. And so they often are and should be the ultimate arbiters of, was the science ultimately impactful? Now, where the rubber hits the road is when we start talking about timelines, start talking about exactly what that impact looks like and how it's verified and all of those things. But I think that something that where we can find a lot of consensus is when we start bringing those end users, right? Those beneficiaries, or those we hope will be beneficiaries, to the table for some of those conversations, as opposed to more intermediary groups like government agencies and funders and folks that are overseeing the compliance of the scientific enterprise maybe itself. And so I think that's a really important part of the conversation here, is that who gets to define the science, and who, as scientists, do we want to be defining the impact of the science?
Great, thank you. And Laurie, can I come to you with the same question?
Yeah, I agree with everything Max said. And it's really interesting when you talked at the departmental level, at the level of the decision, people who are making the decision about recognition and rewards for people doing the research, because it's not necessarily that the currency has been peer-reviewed publications and grants. And because that's what they know, it's a self-perpetuating cycle. A unit might have guidelines, a university might have guidelines that would promote impact. But at the same time, a lot of this often falls down at the level of the committees that are making these decisions, because maybe they don't have the experience or the knowledge about being able to evaluate the quality of those pieces. And so they kind of fall back on what they know. And so there's a whole piece here that is about helping departments and disciplines think about, what does impact mean to you? And so there are some initiatives around that are taking values-based approaches to revising and looking at, what does that mean to have excellence in our field, in our department? What do we consider to be excellence? Some of that is peer-reviewed papers. That's fine. That's legitimate. But some of it might be that we are also wanting to have a direct impact on certain groups, and we should be recognizing that work as part of our recognition system. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see where this goes over the next few years, because we also know that these younger generations of scholars come in, and they've come out of a a culture that's more around having a direct impact of the world and having their work meaning. And so we're recruiting them on that basis, and they're sometimes running into challenges actually getting to implement that. So we're at a very interesting time around this.
Fantastic, thank you. I think we've touched on a couple of questions that I'd like to come to. So I'm going to come to the first one now. And I think a lot of them are kind of around how we approach this from a cultural perspective and how do we get that buy-in from leadership. So my first question is going to be, and Susan, I think I'll come to you with this one if that's okay, is from your own experiences, kind of how do you make that case to leadership to kind of build that space for researchers to be investing in research translation and making sure that's there to support them?
I think this is a really important question because I find that in my job all the time, thinking about that. I think there's a couple things. There's the research ecosystem includes researchers, administrators, taxpayers, all those things, right? And we have this implied social contract that there's research, that the research that gets funded will somehow benefit society, right? So we think about this case making at multiple levels. So at the basic level, we believe that the research that we fund is going to benefit us as the public in some sort of way, right? So that's like the minimum and that's the base, right? But then also many funders are asking researchers to detail the broader impacts or the societal benefits of their work. So we're funded by the National Science Foundation here in the US, and all proposals that go in there are asked to be evaluated on their intellectual merit, the strength of the research, and their broader impact, right? But NSF is not the only funder, private or governmental, that is asking people to talk about the benefits of the research. So at a purely practical level, I make the case also that your research is going to be more competitive and you have the ability maybe to get more funding if you do this well. And then the other thing I'm just going to say, and this picks up on something that Laurie mentioned and something that Max said, and that what Elizabeth also said, is that research that is relevant to communities and serves communities are going to benefit all of us, right? So we talked a little bit about, what makes excellent research. If we're doing research that is relevant to communities, they're going to care about what we're doing. They're going to be invested in what we're doing. It's going to strengthen the excellence of our research. So for me, those are the cases I make, that it's practical, but it also is something that's for the social good.
And Elizabeth, can I come to you with that same question?
Certainly, I kind of think about it in terms of clarity and accountability, because Overton is letting me see, a living picture of the downstream use of what is coming out of the research. And so when you pair that with the data, I mean, it tells a better and more complete story. And it was not a difficult discussion to get buy-in from my institutional leadership based on that.
Great. And Laurie, I'm going to come back to you here with something that you touched on just previously around kind of cultural change and bringing some of the kind of research translation into promotional criteria and things like that for your researchers within your institution. Is there anything alongside that you've seen that's really worked well in terms of your institute, in terms of incentivizing that research translation from the researchers themselves?
It's very tough when you're working with researchers because at the university level, you have a mission, right? And I work a lot with leadership and with leaders around at various levels to say, this is the mission. Every university has a mission of impact service. Sometimes it's more specific about how they couch it. Sometimes it's pretty vague, but it's always tied to mission. But at a researcher level, they're not rewarded for fulfilling the mission of the university. So it's a harder sell at that level. But I think that for me, when I'm working at the researcher level to incentivize this work and think about culture, it again has to do with both what are the values of your discipline? What are your personal values? What did you come into this work trying to do? And then this is going to get you more competitive grants. So it's this combination of values and ideals and practical things that are going to move your career forward at that level.
Great. Thank you. And we're already talking about funders here, so I think this is going to come up a lot in our conversation today, especially around funding grants. And Max, I'm going to come to you with this question, but yeah, we're obviously seeing more funders asking for that evidence as part of their grant applications, and understanding what the real world impact of kind of previous research has been. What have your experiences been seeing this from in your institution? Are you seeing it more and more at the moment? And have you got any examples kind of around where sharing or demonstrating that policy or that societal impact has kind of helped researchers within your institution secure any funding, or has helped you from an institutional perspective attract donors or partners? Sorry, you're still muted.
It's yes across those categories. I think that the key is being able to bring data and insights right forward, and it's all nice to say like, oh, we're going to do this, or sure, we're going to reach out to policy communities, or we're going to reach out to or we're going to reach out to industry or something along those lines in your proposal. But the reality is if you can show that not just the researcher, but the entire research institution is successful in supporting and getting the science out into the world, that makes a big difference. I think that there's increasing scrutiny from funders on the role of institutions in facilitating or being a barrier to science getting out into the world. And so any kind of hard information, especially quantitative information to go along with the anecdotal that can be provided is really essential right now. You asked about donors and sort of other examples institutionally. We're seeing, for instance, the ability to document when a researcher's work is used but is being used, for instance, by government as a really key indicator for helping folks stand out in their promotion and tenure process, particularly when they're having external letters written about them. Being able to when they can include that in their dossier, it's really a key kind of thing to say, okay, this person's well on their way, or their work is being recognized. On the donor front, we have had success here in making the case to our alumni who care deeply about our institution and saying we need to stand up the infrastructure, right, to really be able to facilitate being able to tell the story of impact. And we've seen here in the States, but I think around the world, increasing messaging and communication campaigns going out from institutions that are focused on this is the impact of our research enterprise. This is the value of our research enterprise, really trying to push back against the notion that in particular academic science is some sort of ivory tower navel gazing pursuit, and in fact is something that has real meaningful benefit and is used and valued by leaders in society. And so I think on all fronts, building the infrastructure, data and otherwise, to be able to tell those stories, whatever the audience may be, has become a paramount concern to our institutions.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to let our audience know that our Q&A is open. So if you would like to submit any questions for our panel, please do go ahead and do that as they're talking. We have a load more questions to get through, so I'm going to carry on. And I'm going to go for quite a practical question here next, and I'll come to all four of you in turn. So Susan, I'm going to start off with you here. But in kind of practical terms, what are the best approaches that you've seen for helping build those researcher skills for translating and disseminating their works? So have you seen anything in particular that has kind of really worked for you, or even something that hasn't worked, you've tried, but maybe it hasn't had kind of the best uptake?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is it has to be an integrated approach. Anytime we've seen something that comes from the top down, it gets bogged down somewhere in the system. And even sometimes from the bottom up, it gets bogged down somewhere going the other way. So I think it has to be integrated from students, faculty, staff, administrators, the whole thing. So really thinking about that, I think that's really important. It's also been very helpful to have champions at every level. You need administrative champions who can help financially, who can think about strategic mission, who can add that in there. You also need faculty champions. I've seen that really say, this is really important to us and we need these supports. So I think that has been really helpful. I also think that what hasn't worked as well is figuring out evaluation. We've talked a little bit about assessment and what matters as impact. Who counts for that? We talked about, Max gave a really great definition of what impact is, and we think about impact as being moved outside of just your research group, and that makes a positive change in society. But we haven't figured out a way as institutions to measure that impact. We have counts. We know how many students come through our camps. We know how many papers we have, but we haven't yet figured out a way to have the infrastructure to get at actual impact. So I think that's the one place where I think we haven't figured it out yet, but people are working on it.
Great. And yeah, Laurie, same question for you, approaches to kind of building those researcher skills.
Well, absolutely what Susan said. So you need both administrator and you need like the doers on board and working together to make this happen. The other part about that I would say is that you want to have, I think it works best if you've got cross-unit support from administrative units. So for example, ARIS has a program called ORIC, which stands for something longer, that is helping universities or units, institutions develop the infrastructure to support research impact work. I've been part of it, and these are usually impelled or led by research offices. And that makes sense in that context because these are coming out of grant-getting, grant-seeking initiatives. So, broader impacts is an NSF approach to impact. If you have better, broader impact proposals or plans, you're more likely to get better funding. And so research offices tend to lead these. However, research offices don't necessarily have all the connections and supports that are going to make this as successful as it could be. I've been lucky enough to be in offices. I'm in an office of engagement, and I find that working co-leading an initiative like that with the engagement office, if you have one, and the research office is providing both the research development supports, but also the partnerships, the knowledge of where things are in the institution. That's what these kinds of offices tend to do. And then in my current iteration of it, we also have the Clinical and Translational Science Institute. So I was really excited to see Elizabeth here because we have the health sciences, and my institution is a very strong health science focused institution. And those tend to not be necessarily directly part of these initiatives because sometimes they're medical systems that are over here running their own kind of enterprise. So really thinking thoughtfully about not just having these things come out of a research office, but having it be co-led by multiple units that are related. And you might do something like include government relations in something like this. And so really thinking creatively about those partnerships across areas of the university.
Fantastic. And Liz, can I come to you with the same question?
Sure. As a research office, we're still kind of trying to figure this out. What is the best way to prove value of this product to faculty? And we're trying to lead by example. And we've had some faculty work groups, we've had administrator work groups, and just trying to say this is what we are doing to show impact of our CTSA grant award. And just asking people to think about publications and citations in a different way. How is it being ultimately used in policy and clinical guidance? And but I think we're just going to have to lead by example and continue to demonstrate value. We just opened up the institutional license within the past couple of months, so this is part of our outreach programming of our center.
Great, Max. Same question for you. Sorry, you're on mute again.
You'd think I'd know. So I think to add something complementary here to these really great examples and points is that it's really key to start somewhere, right? And thinking about institutional transformation or data infrastructure, all these things, like it can be overwhelming, and it's important to start in something that can be a motivating use case. And what we've found is that when we bring data to this space, it's a revelation for many folks because often people don't realize that we can measure this and we can bring data to it. But I think even more so, and this is where things can feel a little wonky at first, but can actually be a transformative use case for an institution, is think about where there's a pain point, right? And pilot a solution to it that could be evaluated using the data that you have at your disposal. If the goal is to increase the amount of your institution's research being used by policy audiences, there are actually strategies and solutions that you can deploy, right? Institutional change efforts, behavioral change, capacity building, training efforts. We, for instance, do work with my close colleague Taylor Scott through the research to policy collaboration model, which is a model for building researcher capacity. But we've actually experimented with it, right? We've randomized researchers to receive it and looked at how their kind of future work is used or not, right, by policy audiences, and found ways and developed strategies to do that. And then you can demonstrate to your institution not only is the data and the information valuable, but it can actually be used for benchmarking. And I think that's a really key element here. And Eris in particular, I think, embodies this. Is it's not just about talking about all the good we're currently doing. It's about changing institutions all the way down to the faculty level to really enhance the impact of our work from the get-go. And I think that's really key, is that, but we have to have information to be able to benchmark across that.
Okay, and just staying on that, because I know you're talking about these interventions, Max. It would be, I mean, it's sometimes hard, especially with policy. We know that it can take a long time for you to see kind of that research come through and have impact on policy going forward, because I mean, it can be years before that research gets picked up. I guess, how are you making sure that you're putting those kind of evaluation pieces into place now, so that you can turn around to your leadership within your organization and say, look, we've just spent a lot of time really building this facility for translating this, and I will have something to show you in the future, but I maybe don't have anything now. Kind of, how are you kind of building those data points to say
No,
we're having
that's a
impact?
great point. Thanks for asking the question, because I wanted to go deeper, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time as we kind of get through these different areas. But I think most importantly here is that, one, it doesn't have to take a lot of time, right? So to change the institutional's overall research portfolio and how much it's being used, right, or not by different key external audiences, that will take time, right? But strategic kind of communication efforts can get the science out there faster, and these sort of behavior change efforts, where we're actually thinking about how we build the capacity of, for instance, our faculty to be able to engage directly with policy communities, that can be done. And we're not talking decades here, right? We're talking, months and years in many cases, and so it might not work within a, getting it by Q2, but certainly by, let's talk next year. We, for instance, just wrapped up a experiment that we did here at Penn State, where we provided a waitlist design, where we provided additional support to both our kind of initial wave one and wave two participants in that waitlist, but the wave two, of course, got it a little bit later. We provided key technical assistance as well as award support around how they engage with external community partners. And we were able to evaluate over the course of that year outcomes, right? It did not necessarily take a epoch to be able to make these assessments. Similarly, we've done work where we've done randomizations of, as I mentioned, researchers. We've also randomized external audiences, like we have a behavioral intervention for policymakers to enhance their use of research. We've done a randomized control trial using that model, for instance, of members of Congress. We did an experimental trial of over 90 members of Congress, provided half of them the supports around connecting them with researchers, and how to work with those researchers. And we saw not only changes in those congressional offices' culture around the value of scientific evidence, but how they actually use that scientific evidence in the bills that were being introduced to Congress. And I think and that happened over a 2-year time period. That was not, a decade-long project. That was something that was able to happen in about 24 months. And I think that that's really key, is that when we overlay good data with high quality of study evaluations that actually let us study that science of scientific impact, we can do so much. And so that's a really exciting element. So Taylor, hopefully I went the right depth on that question, but as you could imagine, I could talk about that all day.
Yeah,
And
no, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm just going to open this up to our panel. Does anyone else want to jump in on this particular point? All right, I can move on to another question. So we have got a few coming through from the audience. I'm going to start bringing some of these in. And Laurie, I might come to you with this one, if possible, is kind of how do you embed impact-seeking behaviors into your research culture?
What a good question. How do we? Uh, for me, just everything comes around to what is the motivation of people to do this work? And the motivation is either your values or, but for junior faculty especially, it's the promotion and tenure process. And so really working again, as Susan was saying, at both the administrator level and the individual level to think through how are we integrating this together to make a supportive culture for this work is really important. I'm feeling really, I tend to be fairly cynical. I feel like our systems are very slow and challenging, and for many good reasons, like shared governance and things, but it makes it slow to change. But I'm in the process of looking at a promotion and tenure intervention or activity. And when I reached out to the deans, the 16 deans of the colleges at my university and all of our system campuses about did they want to participate in this, almost every single one was really excited about it. They all had different motivations about or different activities that they wanted to focus on. But none of it was cynical. It was this is our mission. We want to do this in our colleges. We want to make this better for our faculty, and we're excited to do that in collaboration with our colleagues of other colleges, so that we're learning from each other to do it. So, I think and then of course there's like having very good supports, so having training to do this work, being able to connect people to other resources. Eris has phenomenal resources for this, and so we have to put them in front of people constantly, because unless you need them at that moment, you don't remember that they're there. So we're sort of thinking about how do we make our communication strategies internally effective so that when somebody needs those resources, they're there. And then there's things like just having some sense about what's available. There are tremendous resources around my system, and it's such a decentralized place that nobody knows where they are or that they exist in capacity. So being able to figure out what's where and having a connecting structure. And then at the very core of it is being able to have conversations with the faculty and the researchers and the community about what is it that gets you excited about this work. What does it look like? What are the possibilities? And being able to brainstorm that, and so that they know that this is feasible. This is feasible to do, and that there are people there who care about supporting them. So trying to think about that. But when I think about culture, research culture, I'm always coming down to promotion and tenure.
Liz, would you like to jump in on that one?
So when I first opened up Overton for the first time to take a look, all the data it generated, I found to be kind of overwhelming and not really, okay, where do I really start so I can dig in and really start to think about the most effective and way to use this resource. And it's like the old adage, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So just kind of focusing on one finite thing I want to find out, and then figuring out what data is generated from that. CTSA use what's called the Translational Science Benefits Model. And so I'm able to take publication. I'm able to link it to whether it's clinical guidance, whether it is community impact, whether it's economic development, or whether it's a policy change in government. And just basically managing it one bite at a time, so I can become a better evangelist for this product.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We've had a really interesting question come in that I'd like to go across to. And Susan, I might come to you first, but please, any of my panelists, feel free to jump in on this one. So talking about kind of the changing world we're living in, particular, looking at climate change, looking at kind of how this is impacting local communities, and especially how we can support local researchers to help with the research that's happening and issues that are affecting their local communities that they're living in and they're working in? And is there anything more that we can be doing to kind of support your researchers in your local areas, to both at the kind of state level, but even looking closer to that kind of city level? Is there a lot that we can be doing to support our researchers with helping their real local communities?
I really love this question, and I thank the person for putting it in the chat, because there's a lot of nuance to this question too, right? It talks about how do we support researchers who are located in an area that's affected by a challenge, but also how do we deal with universities coming in and dropping out, which I think is an important thing. So I'm going to start with that one, which is a lot of times when it comes to research impact or public engagement or opportunities to work with the public, we're sometimes seen as dropping in and dropping out or being extractive, right? So we come in, we do our research in and on communities, and then we leave and we don't share that information back. So I think one of the things is talking about how to be a good partner, how to work alongside communities. One is co-creation of research questions, thinking about what matters, thinking about co-creation of knowledge and involving community partners as equal partners within the project, and then also sharing back the information that you gain from that. So that's a part of that question that you didn't ask, but I think is really important. So I wanted to bring that up. The other part is that I think sometimes we think about researchers as existing in another plane. We forget that they are parents and children and employees and have to think about their jobs and things like that. So when we think about promotion and tenure, they have bosses who want them to be productive just like everybody else. So I think we sometimes think of researchers as existing outside of the communities in which they live and work and interact. And I think that that's really an important mindset thing, to think that we are embedded within communities all the time. So I think one is making opportunities for researchers to interact with communities on a daily basis, to think about where they are interacting. We always talk about, when you're thinking about engaging the public, your impact identity. And we have people start with the places where they're already engaging. So are you volunteering at your local food bank? Are you involved in your faith community? Whatever that is. So when we think about supports for that, here on our campus, we are a land grant. You mentioned that at the beginning. Part of our extension service includes emergency management. So when there are floods in the northwest corner of the state of Missouri, our extension office is there right at the beginning, sandbagging, helping with things like that. So I think one is being embedded within the communities and giving researchers practical ways and practical tools for being able to help and be that first line in universities as well. And then the other part is, again, getting people to think about, where do we ask the research questions? Can you start thinking about your community and seeing what is relevant to them? What are the questions they're asking? What research is important to them? And then think about incorporating that into your research question. So to me, those are the things that I think about.
Fantastic. And Max, I didn't know if you wanted to come in on
Yeah.
that one as well.
I did. I mean, because I think it is such an important question, and Susan's hit on, I think, a fundamental aspect that we're seeing in our world, of course, this dehumanization, and it happens with scientists as well, and those that we hope are going to use our work, right? We make all these assumptions of them being the other, and that they have all these stereotypes of what policymakers are, or what communities are or not, right? Or what entrepreneurs are or not. And I think that that's one of the fundamental things is breaking down those in-group, out-group conversations and ways of thinking, so that we don't do that, so that researchers aren't exploitive and extractive, right? But also that, researchers are seen as people, right? And that we do that kind of training from members of Congress all the way down to local school boards. We really try to work on that humanization, and I think that that's key. I also think that it again speaks to the importance of having who defines the impact, right? And if we kind of come to the consensus, well, some of the impact of science needs to be defined by those communities themselves, right? And are they going to tell a story of benefit, right? And I think that that's key to this, right? Extractive science only kind of masks the positive downstream impacts that science could have, right? And if we're not living that mission, even all the way during the discovery process, then that research translation and impact is going to be honestly tainted. So,
Laurie, did you want to jump in as well?
I do. I do want to jump in because I so appreciate this question, and it highlights a couple of things for me. So I'm the Vice Provost for Public Engagement at my institution, and this question is about engagement. And I'm the president of the Engagement Scholarship Consortium, show back here. There's a whole field of people who really think about this co-creation, about reciprocal benefit, mutual benefit, and about how do we train our faculty and build their capacity, as well as our graduate students, our emerging scholars, to be able to do this work appropriately. And so for people who really more on the research development side, know that there is a whole field of this. You may have offices, and you certainly have units that really think about this, to be able to do a lot of professional development, to be able to facilitate those partnerships so that they're effective, to make sure that we are sharing power. And none of this is easy. This is all working with people, and people are not easy. And this is people coming from very different worlds. And I would say that there's a disconnect in our institutions about what it means to get the trust of the public, because we do tend to rely on large-scale communications about great stories. And that's great, but the real change happens, I believe, at that relationship level. And it takes more resources and it takes more time, but it's saying, here's a particular population, like people who are undergoing traumatic changes due to climate change, and saying, here's research that is relevant for you particular population, and this is how it's guided by you, and here's how it's responsive to what you want to know and where you want it to go in the future. And that's really very much coming out of support from engagement and so forth. The other thing I'll say, though, that I want to make sure not to miss is that probably, to me, the most effective impact that you can have, the most meaningful impact one can have in many ways, is policy change, because that's affecting a large scale. It's very hard to get change at community level indicators. Sometimes funders say, how are you going to change this community? And you usually are only able to work with a very select group of people who are participating in your work. And so it's really difficult to show community level change. With policy change, you have the greater probability of doing that. And that's where Overton comes in for me. That's how I've used it, is to be able to say, for my institution or a particular college or a particular researcher, look at this. I was very excited to go into Overton and find myself. I would have been bummed if I didn't, but I was in there to be able to say, okay, my work is being used around out of school time programming for youth in challenged schools. So to be able to do that is really meaningful, and it's really one of the only ways I know of to be able to get that kind of an indicator that might really affect community level or population level change.
Fantastic. Thank you all for your thoughts on that one. We've actually had another question come through. Laurie, I'm going to come back to you because I'm going to jump right in with this one. We've had a kind of question come in saying, why is it so hard to communicate with government and the public around impact and the value of that academic research? And you've touched on that just a little bit then, but I'm actually going to split this into two questions. I think we need to maybe approach this slightly differently between how we're communicating with the public versus how we're communicating with government. Or you might disagree with me entirely and say it's the same. So yeah, what can kind of be done there when we're bringing those researchers in? Do we need to be telling them to communicate differently if they're trying to communicate directly with the public versus if they're trying to kind of communicate directly with government? Is it one and the same or slightly different?
I think it's somewhat different. There's a capacity building piece to it on either end. So how to work with community members, and that can be corporate partners as well, but working with people who are external stakeholders, it takes a skill set of, and not everybody is suited, has that skill set or wants to develop it, and that's okay. But if you're going to do that, you want to do it effectively. So there's a set of outcomes that are related to being able to work with people and be able to take perspective and be able to understand what their motivation is and what benefits are for them. As Max was saying, what does impact mean to them? as well as knowing that we need to build our own impacts in too. We need to be able to get those publications. We need to be able to fulfill our criteria. For government, it's such a challenging and interesting ecosystem. And I always recommend people work with people who are experts in working with government as opposed to necessarily working directly. You can do harm, you can do great good. So I think it's really interesting to hear about what Max is talking about related to that. On that faculty side, again, you can build their capacity, and some will be intrinsically motivated to go do that work, but they may be actively being couched away from it, especially if they're junior faculty. And so that's again why I'm harping on promotion and tenure and review criteria, because if that's built in, then they have an actual clear motivation to do it, as do their mentors or their, chairs and so forth.
Yeah, fantastic point. Max?
Laurie couldn't be more right about incentive structures. It's really key, and so uh, I don't think enough could be said about the importance of that being the biggest lever that we can control. I also agree that like working with government, there's lots of pitfalls and there's lots of perceived risks that are not so big, and there's lots of real risks that people don't think about, and so we often do facilitate and want to see that work happen through some sort of coordinating intermediary, especially for more junior folks. We see real meaningful risks sometimes for more marginalized scholars in getting engaged in certain areas, or scholars working on certain types of topics around the world. And so it is important, right, for a variety of reasons. But as Laurie also said, it's one of the ways that science can most impactfully change the world, and most visible ways too, right, institutionally. And so I think like that's a key. It's a key balance, right? It's one of the reasons that many folks around the world have worked so hard to build academic freedom, right, in their countries and within their institutions, is so we can participate, right, in the larger public discourse, and so the science can go out into the world. I think to Laurie's earlier point, like, so we work in getting science used by policymakers, by government officials, as well as for community level work, right, and nonprofit NGO type groups, as well as for industry. And I think it's an important thing to not forget about that. Much of our scientific work does often get taken up in industry, and it too has risk in terms of the potential benefits or harm that it can do to society. And again, right, when the scientists sort of retreat and aren't at the table, or are just viewed as sort of the academics, right, that don't really play a role in the translation process, that's where we can see things go sideways. So it's very important that we think about this not as has already been said, as a relational process, but also a process where we build infrastructure like incentive structure change that backstops and facilitates and incentivizes this work to happen in the first place.
Fantastic, thank you. Elizabeth, I'm going to come to you with this question that we've also had in the chat. So what are kind of some of the barriers that you've seen for uptake of research and policy? And yeah, how do you get more policymakers to be using that academic research in their work?
I think we have to retrain how we faculty write grants, honestly. And yes, we're pursuing this particular line of thought or theory, but you're going to have to do a good job of demonstrating what is the ultimate impact going to be. And scientists really haven't written grants in that manner. And so trying to pivot to incorporate this into one's training is becoming a big issue for our center. I know when we reapply for our CTSA status, I have to be able to say more than, okay, I helped all these people get a grant. I have to be able to demonstrate why I was a good return on investment, and being able to cite, this is how we serve the community. This is how we improve clinical guidance. This is how we have improved, economic development factors, and really incorporating that into how we train faculty in grant writing.
Great. We are coming towards the close of our session here. We have about 5 minutes left, which means I'm going to move on to my final question. But for those attending today, it would be great to hear, if you feel comfortable doing so, what your main takeaways from the session are. So if you'd like to, it would be great to see that in the chat. So if you've had anything that's kind of really stuck with you, please do share that. But we're going to move on to our final question. And Susan, I'm going to come to you with this one first, but I'm going to come to all my panelists, so don't worry. So what does the future hold for creating and monitoring impact within that higher education space? And I guess as an institution, what do you need to move forward with that? What support do you need to kind of keep impact moving in the right direction?
I think the first thing I would say is do something, right? It doesn't matter how small or how big it is, do something. When we work through our ORIC community, that's the program to enhance organizational research impact capacity. Eris never says there's one way to build institutional capacity. What we do is we come alongside institutions, and I see some of our org folks here on this call, so I give a shout out to them for being here. What we say is think about what is right for your institution. One size does not fit all. And so what we do is come alongside them, use our best practice, but then help them figure out what works for them. So as you're thinking about your institution, as you're thinking about as an individual, what makes sense for you or your institution, scale it to that context. The other thing I will say is that we have people in our community whose institution may or may not be ready to build institutional impact infrastructure, right? They may not be ready for that. That doesn't mean you're alone. There is a community of people who want to come alongside you as somebody who's an individual who's interested in impact, and we want to help build your capacity for that. So I think the thing I would say is the future is bright. Private funders, public funders, institutions are really interested in impact. Individual researchers, Laurie mentioned our emerging scholars, graduate students, and postdocs are interested in this. The community is interested in this. So I think the future is bright for impact work. And I'll just say, take the first step.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's a lovely note to end on. Laurie, can I come to you with the same question?
On a practical level, I mean, everything Susan said, and on a practical level, starting with building a coalition within your institution, from multiple, I keep saying sectors, but multiple kinds of units, administrative units and so forth is really important. I think we're in a really interesting time right now. So we know that we need to show impact. We know that our institutions want to show impact. And there's very little consensus within them about what that means and who's responsible, as opposed to we're all responsible. And trying to get a common understanding of what our institution thinks about as impact and how that plays out through different groups. So impact through engagement, we're focusing on one thing. Research office is focusing on another. Government relations is focusing on another. Let's bring the groups together to say, how do we actually intersect and support one another in our discussions of impact? And Eris is working on a project around this right now to understand what does impact mean from these different perspectives, and have a tool to be able to help institutions think about that as a process. Because we are just so disconnected within most of our institutions, especially our large ones. So being able to facilitate that work more and more is only going to lead us forward, and we'll be able to learn from each other. But we're in a place where we can actually make some significant change around this, because we're in upheaval, right, in many ways. And so we have this opportunity to meet that challenge.
Fantastic. And Elizabeth, coming to you.
I think from where I sit, I think we can expect tighter coupling of grant identifiers to policy evidence. And the sooner we learn how to build these muscles now, it's going to save time later. And again, we have a small plan that we're trying to move forward within our institution. And I think as we demonstrate value of the tool, others will help join in the conversation and help push us forward in the ways that Laurie specifically talked about.
Great. And finally, Max, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's I think to the point of do something, right? Even if it's small, I think bringing people together, these are really important elements. And I think it's document, right? Capture your stories as you go through that process so that you can look back and you can share them, right, with folks. I think that groups like Eris and others already have resources to get you going, and so don't reinvent the wheel. I highly encourage you to not do that, but make it your own, right? Tailor it to your institutional need. And otherwise, we're going to kind of keep going around and around on this. And if we don't define what impact is and work with those end users, like I mentioned before, about what the impact is and how we actually characterize it, others will do it for us. And I think that's a really important element, is that if we don't take ownership of what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish, then we leave it to others to define. So.
Great. Thank you so much. I would like to say a big thank you to our panel here, Laurie, Elizabeth, Susan, and Max, for joining us today. This has been a really fantastic hour, and I hope that everyone's got some really tangible takeaways. I know I do. As I mentioned previously, this session's been recorded. We will send the recording through, as well as a link to Overton's new impact reporting guide and any of the links that have been shared in the chat today. We will send you through a list of all the resources so that you can revisit those at any time that you would like to. I just want to say a massive thank you for everyone for spending an hour with us and learning more about impact and why it is important and building that impact engine. So once again, thank you to our panel and thank you to our attendees for today. And we hope to see you at another webinar in the future. Thank you, everybody.